It has been a long time since that divorce trial that tore apart all my dignity, yet whenever I close my eyes, the taunts and doubts from the courtroom still pierce my heart as clearly as ever. At that time, I was 8 months pregnant, my heavy body straining against a loose knit sweater, and I had to steady myself on chairs and tables with every step. I walked into the Central Family Court of London carrying a heart full of grievances, hoping that the child in my belly would help me claim the justice I deserved. What awaited me, however, was a torrent of filth poured by my husband Ethan and his mother Martha. The judge had barely taken his seat when Martha sprang up, her finger jabbing directly at my belly, her shrill voice grating against my eardrums. "Your Honor, don't be fooled by her. She's deliberately faking a pregnancy to gain sympathy. This whole show today is just to stall the divorce." Ethan cooperated with a smirk, his face full of sarcasm. "She's always been good at this kind of trick, pretending to feel unwell whenever we argued. Now she's using her belly as leverage, just to squeeze more property and compensation out of me." The two of them played off each other, every word accusing me of lying and deception. The judge frowned at me, his suspicion barely concealed, and the low murmurs from the public gallery pressed down on me like a weight. I gripped the hem of my dress, trying to defend myself, when a sudden tearing pain shot through my lower abdomen, and cold sweat instantly soaked my back. I doubled over instinctively, clutching my stomach, trembling with pain, but Martha only burst out laughing. "Look at her. Here she goes again, acting pitiful." Ethan chuckled along, convinced I was faking pain to delay the proceedings. Shame, hurt, and physical agony hit me all at once. The next second, warm liquid gushed down my thighs, spreading in a large puddle on the glossy courtroom floor. My waters had broken. The bailiff rushed over, and the moment he saw what was happening, his voice cracked. "Your Honor, she's going into labor. Call an ambulance. Dial 999. At that shout, the noisy, jeering courtroom fell dead silent. Everyone's eyes fixed on my legs, drenched in amniotic fluid. Martha, who had just been spewing slander, froze on the spot, her smirk wiped clean. Ethan's smug sneer also froze, his face turning deathly pale. In the utter silence, the elderly judge slowly pushed back his chair and rose to his feet, his heavy gaze falling on the panicked mother and son. I leaned against the cold wooden bench, contractions crashing over me one after another, and looked at the two people who had spun lies to hurt me, my nearest and dearest. The pain in my chest was sharper than the labor pains. They had never believed me for a second, and only now, with the truth laid bare before everyone, did their masks crumble. But the betrayal and humiliation I had endured could never be undone. The wail of the ambulance siren cut through London's grey sky. I lay on the cold stainless steel stretcher, and every jolt of the vehicle intensified the ache in my lower belly. Martha's shrill cries and Ethan's ashen face were left behind the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom, but those piercing words, liar, actress, sympathy seeker, clung like brambles rooted deep in my mind. The paramedic was a young red-haired woman. She deftly placed an oxygen mask over my face and spoke in a steady voice, telling me to breathe deeply. Through the window, the buildings along the Thames rushed past, and the grey light filtering through the slatted blinds cast alternating stripes of brightness and shadow across my face. I clutched the canvas strap at the edge of the stretcher, my nails almost digging into the fabric, with only one thought echoing: my baby must not die. "Hang in there," the redhead said, checking my pulse. 5 minutes to St. Thomas's, you and your baby will be fine. I gasped, broken words escaping from under the mask. "They said I was faking." "Don't think about that," she said gently, patting my hand, her eyes showing a flicker of sympathy. "Right now you need to conserve your strength." But how could I simply not think about it? Ethan's nonchalant twirling of his pen at the defendant's table, Martha's bright red lips parting to spew venom, and the judge's cold, scrutinizing gaze, all of it flashed before my eyes. I shut my eyes, trying to drown the images with the pain of contractions, only to find the two inseparable, physical and emotional agony intertwined, each contraction reminding me how deeply they had stabbed me when I was most vulnerable. The delivery room at St. Thomas's was quieter than I had imagined. Cool white light fell on the pale green walls, and the air carried a mix of disinfectant and a sweet smell. When I was wheeled into the private room, the obstetrician was already waiting, a woman in her early 40s with gold-rimmed glasses and a slight Manchester accent. "Mrs. Gray, I'm Dr. Davis, your attending physician today," she said, quickly scanning the handover notes from the paramedic. "Your blood pressure is a little high, and your contractions are accelerating. We need to start fetal monitoring immediately." As the nurse helped me remove the knit sweater soaked in amniotic fluid, my fingers touched my own cold skin. In the mirror I saw my puffy face, dark circles from sleepless nights, and cracked, dry lips. This body carried a life about to be born, and also all the humiliation and betrayal of a marriage that existed only in name. The fetal monitor screen showed a green waveform, and the strong thump-thump from the probe reached my ears. For a moment, my taut nerves eased. The baby was alive, still fighting inside me, still determined to enter this world. "Fetal heart rate is normal," Dr. Davis nodded. "But the contractions are quite regular, and labor usually accelerates after waters break. Mrs. Gray, you'll meet your baby very soon." I opened my mouth to say thank you, but my throat was choked with a sour lump, and speech was difficult. From the next delivery room came a piercing scream, followed by a loud baby cry, and through the walls, that sound made my eyes suddenly wet. If Ethan were here, what would he do? The thought barely surfaced before I crushed it. He wasn't here, and he never would be. In court he had chosen to stand with Martha, sneering that she's always been good at this kind of trick. That face of his I would never forget. The intervals between contractions grew shorter, the pain more intense. The nurse started and 4 of oxytocin. The clear liquid dripped slowly through the transparent tube into my veins, like a cruel countdown. I bit down on the towel the nurse offered, my 10 fingers clawing at the metal bed rails, sweat and tears mingling as they ran into my ears. I couldn't tell which came from my body and which from my heart. Dr. Davis checked my dilation every 10 minutes or so. Her gloved fingers were cold and made me flinch, but her voice remained calm and gentle. "Good, 7 centimeters. Just a little longer." I had never felt time so acutely. Each contraction felt like its own century, building, peaking, receding, over and over without end. I stared at the ring-shaped light on the ceiling, my vision blurring and clearing, and in a daze I remembered the night 3 years ago when Ethan proposed to me, down on one knee at the top of the London Eye, a diamond ring glittering in his trembling hand, saying, "I want to watch the rest of London's night views with you for the rest of my life." Liar. A complete and utter liar. When the final contractions peak threatened to break my back, Dr. Davis raised her voice, "I see the head. Mrs. Gray, one more push, just one." I took a deep breath, channeling every last ounce of strength into my lower abdomen, a scream trapped in my throat and reduced to a muffled grunt. Then, a slippery, warm weight slid out of my body, and the whole world fell silent. Then, a cry. A loud, angry cry, like a slap across the silence of the delivery room. "It's a boy." The nurse carried the wrinkly, red-skinned little thing to the nearby table, her voice barely concealing her joy. Weight 3.2 kilograms, APGAR score 10, perfectly healthy. I collapsed on the bed, all strength drained, unable even to lift a finger. But my eyes chased that tiny figure in the nurse's hands, watching his thin arms flailing, his toothless mouth wide open in a wail, his whole little face scrunched up like an angry monkey. Tears slid from the corners of my eyes into my hair, cold. He was alive. He was healthy. He had arrived safely. The nurse cleaned him, wrapped him in a light blue blanket, and brought him to my pillow. I turned my head, my nose almost touching his soft, still amniotic-scented crown. A few strands of damp black hair clung to his pink scalp. His crying faded to small hiccups, his eyelids half closed, revealing light brown irises underneath. Ethan's eyes were dark brown, mine were black. This little creature's eyes were a shade in between, a wet, amber-like brown. "What's his name?" the nurse asked with a smile. "We need the mother's details for the birth certificate." I stared at the tiny, still trembling face. Outside, the hospital PA system murmured a name 3 times, probably a relative looking for a lost patient. But all that was behind a membrane. Inside this room there was only him and me, and that fragile self I had broken in court and was trying so hard to piece back together. "Shall we give him a name?" Dr. Davis came over, pulling off her blooded gloves, her voice soft. "Most mothers do it now." "Thomas," I said, my voice so hoarse I barely recognized it. "Thomas Gray. Tommy for short. Safe." I had brought him into this world amidst courtroom slander and shame, amidst the agony of labor, in a delivery room without a father. I only wished him peace, a steady, safe childhood, not like me, who had entrusted half a life to an unworthy man. The nurse recorded the name on the form. The crib wheels made a soft squeak as Thomas was placed in a clear incubator, against the wall, the monitor light blinking on his tiny chest. I watched that direction, exhaustion washing over me like a tide, my eyelids growing heavy, yet a voice deep in my mind remained clear. I could not let this be. I stayed in hospital for 3 days. During that time, Ethan's name flashed on my phone 17 times. I didn't answer a single call. Martha didn't call at all. Perhaps her heavily powdered face was still frozen in the embarrassment of the courtroom, and she couldn't bring herself to contact me. But both of them appeared in the British media. On the second morning, the nurse handed me a copy of the Times, and in the corner of the social section was a small headline: "Woman gives birth mid-trial at family court." The report was brief and neutral, only saying that during a divorce hearing at a family court, the petitioner went into labor and the proceedings were adjourned, with the party taken to hospital. No names were mentioned. But I knew that at Ethan's investment bank and among Martha's social circles, the news had already exploded. On the third afternoon, as I was preparing for discharge, someone knocked on the door. A woman around 40 walked in, dressed in a sharply tailored dark gray suit, hair perfectly pinned up, with a pair of thin-framed glasses. She first showed me her card, Catherine Foster, partner, Foster Solicitors, and then sat down in the chair beside the bed, pulling a stack of documents from her briefcase. "Mrs. Gray, I've been sent by your university friend Sarah Jones," she said, pushing up her glasses. "Sarah saw the news about your situation, and asked me to come and see you." Sarah Jones. The name made me pause for a moment. She had been my roommate in university, later marrying a Scottish man, and moving to Edinburgh. We occasionally exchanged likes on social media. I never expected she would go this far after seeing that news item. My situation. I glanced instinctively toward Thomas. The baby was sleeping peacefully, his little fists tucked by his cheeks. "Sarah spoke very highly of your friendship," Catherine said with a slight, professional smile that carried no excess warmth. "But I'm here to talk business. Mrs. Gray, everything you went through at the Central Family Court, Sarah has given me a brief summary. I want to ask you one question. Are you planning to go through with this divorce and walk away with nothing?" My fingers tightened around Thomas. The baby hummed softly in his sleep and settled back down. "I don't see any other option," I heard myself say, my voice dry as sandpaper. "Ethan's legal team is the best in London, and Martha's money could fund 3 top firms in a war of attrition. I'm just a foreign national on a spouse visa, even my work rights are restricted. Catherine opened the first page of the document and slid it toward me. It was a client engagement letter template, filled with dense English clauses, with a blank signature line at the end. If you're willing to instruct me, I can show you the options, she said. I've been practicing in London for 15 years, and I've handled more divorce cases than you'd imagine. I've got 7 successful precedents where the husband used fake pregnancy as a delaying and defamation tactic. I stared at the paper, but my focus wouldn't settle. Outside the window, London's usual drizzle had started, slanting against the glass, blurring the distant outline of Parliament into a grey smudge. I can't afford your fees, I admitted. My bank accounts are in Ethan's name, he froze all joint accounts last week. I've even had to borrow money from friends for groceries. Sarah has already covered the initial consultation fee, Catherine said, her tone unchanged. If we proceed, we can work on a contingency basis, you won't need to pay anything up front. Thomas shifted in the crib, raising his little fists above his head, his mouth opening into a tiny O. I looked at him, this child who had been brought into the world on the amniotic fluid-stained floor of a courtroom, and something deep in my chest slowly hardened. I'll sign, I said. But I have one condition. I want sole, absolute custody of Thomas. Ethan is not to have any visitation rights at all. Catherine raised an eyebrow, but didn't answer immediately. After a few seconds of deliberation, she flipped to the second page and pointed to a clause. Under British law, courts generally prefer shared custody for young children. To completely deny a parent visitation, you need clear evidence that the parent poses a potential threat to the child. They publicly defamed me in court, my voice began to tremble, but not from fear. I stood before the judge carrying his child, and they called me a liar. Would you trust a man like that to be a good father? Catherine looked at me for a long moment. Her gaze was cool, almost clinical, but beneath the professional detachment, I caught a hint of softening. I need evidence, she said. In the 5 years you've lived in Britain, has Ethan or Martha ever subjected you to any form of physical violence, threats, or coercive control? Any witnesses? Medical records? Emails or text messages? Anything in writing? I closed my eyes. Too many fragments of the past 5 years surged forward, Ethan hurling a glass against the wall in a drunken rage, Martha telling me at a family dinner that foreign women are known for chasing money and status, and those sleepless nights locked out of the bedroom, crying alone. But I had always been good at enduring. I had never kept any evidence. No, I said, opening my eyes. I kept nothing. Then start keeping things from now on, Catherine said, closing the file and rising to leave. At the door, she turned back. Mrs. Gray, you've just experienced a very public childbirth, and frankly, that is overwhelming sympathy in any courtroom. The judge heard Ethan and Martha's words with his own ears. There were at least 15 people in the gallery, and the transcript is complete. That's your advantage, don't waste it. After she left, the room fell silent again. The rain continued, its patter through the walls like distant drumming. I lifted Thomas from the crib and held him to my chest. His sweet milky scent reached my nose, his warmth seeping through the blanket into my cold skin. I picked up my phone, unlocked it, and opened the chat with Ethan. His last message, sent 3 days ago, read, "Don't make a scene tomorrow. Accept the terms and sign." I didn't reply. After a moment of hesitation, I opened the voice memo app. The red record button lit up, and I heard myself speak in a voice that was unusually calm and steady. Recording. 3 days after the divorce filing, Thomas was born, healthy. Ethan has not visited the hospital, nor has he sent a single message asking if we are safe. Martha likewise. Save. New file. The rain outside had stopped, and a thin ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, slanting across Thomas's blanket. I bent and kissed his forehead. In his sleep, he curved his lips, almost as if smiling. On the day of discharge, Sarah flew down from Edinburgh to pick me up. She was thinner than in university, her hair shorter, with a small diamond stud in her ear, but the fine creases around her eyes, when she smiled, were just as I remembered. She had rented a car and drove us to a short-let flat she had arranged in Greenwich, southeast London, quiet, off the beaten track, far from the areas Ethan and Martha frequented. "You stay here," Sarah said, setting the baby carrier on the coffee table, surveying the 40-square-meter open-plan flat. "I've prepaid 3 months' rent. Don't argue with me." "Sarah," I started, but my throat closed up again. "Stop right there," she said, raising her hand. "If you say thank you, I'll take it back. Remember how many times you fetched hot water for me in college, and saved me library seats? You do the math." I couldn't help laughing, the first laugh in over a month. The muscles in my face felt stiff and painful. Thomas woke in the carrier, wriggling and fussing. I picked him up and began to unbutton my top to feed him. Sarah sat beside me, watching me awkwardly adjust my position, until the baby finally latched on and settled. "Catherine told me," Sarah said softly. "You're going all the way." "Yes," I said, looking down at Thomas's bulging cheeks as he fed, gently stroking the fine fuzz on his head. "Ethan's going to fight back hard," Sarah said, handing me her phone. "Look at this, I found it yesterday." On screen was a blog post published 3 days earlier, titled, "The £1 Million Scam of a Foreign Bride, The True Story of a City Elite." It didn't name names, but anyone familiar with Ethan White's background could see who it was about. The article vividly described a foreign woman who used pregnancy to defraud a man of marriage and money, and when exposed, staged a fake labor in court. It painted Ethan as a deceived, pitiable husband and me as a scheming gold digger. The comments had already exceeded 200, most cursing, foreign con artists. The few that questioned how one could fake labor with real amniotic fluid were drowned in the hysteria. My fingers gripped the phone's edge, knuckles white. The blog's registrant, Sarah leaned in and lowered her voice, is the son of Martha's best friend, a media student in Manchester. Who do you think put him up to it? I turned off the screen and put the phone down on the sofa. Thomas had finished feeding, let out a small burp, and dropped off to sleep again in my arms, his soft, even breathing like a tiny steady drumbeat against my chest. "Let them write," I said. "The more, the better." Sarah blinked. "What do you mean?" "Catherine said we need evidence," I said, lifting my eyes to meet hers. "Defamation is evidence. Cyberbullying is evidence. Using the media to smear a spouse is evidence. The more they escalate, the more I have to bring to court." Sarah stared at me for a few seconds. Her expression shifted from worry to something almost like respect. She patted my shoulder and said nothing more. That night, after Sarah had gone back to her hotel and Thomas was sleeping soundly in his crib, I sat alone in the small living room, reopened the blog post on my laptop, and read every line and every comment. The screen's cold light reflected on my face. I took screenshots of everything and sent them via Catherine's encrypted client. A soft notification sounded as the email sent. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. Greenwich's night sky was clearer than central London's. A few stars flickered along the edges of the clouds. An occasional car passed below, its headlights briefly sweeping across the ceiling before fading. I hugged my arms, feeling the goosebumps on my skin. 5 years ago, I had met Ethan White for the first time at Manchester Airport. He was the representative of a British investment bank coming to negotiate a merger, I was the translator on the project team. He wore a flawlessly tailored navy suit, and when he smiled, fine lines appeared at the corners of his eyes. He could say hello and thank you with fairly decent pronunciation. After the project ended, he stayed in Manchester an extra 2 weeks, sent me flowers every day, took me to restaurants by the canal, and held my hand on a boat ride, saying, "I've never met a woman as quiet and strong as you." Quiet. I thought it was a compliment then. Now I understood. He had always wanted a quiet, obedient accessory, who wouldn't cause him trouble, a showpiece for an international marriage. When that showpiece began to want independent property rights, wanted her name on the deed, wanted to keep working after having a child, she transformed from the perfect wife into a scheming fraud. I turned back to the crib and crouched down, watching Thomas's lashes flutter in his sleep. His little nostrils rose and fell, his fingers curled into his palm like an unopened bud. "Mummy will fight for everything," I whispered in the dark. "Everything they took from her." Thomas's lips moved slightly, as if answering in his dream. Over the next 2 weeks, my life split into 2 entirely different states. By day, I was Thomas's mother, feeding, changing, soothing, burping, snatching bites of food and showers in the gaps between his cries, my skin always smelling of milk and drool, my hair thrown into a loose bun. By night, when the world went quiet, I sat at my laptop and became a cold-hearted evidence collector. Catherine sent me a list of 15 categories of materials to retrieve and preserve: bank statements from the marriage, property documents, Ethan's income records, my work history, medical records, social media interactions, emails, and screenshots of text messages. Each item had a legal purpose: to prove matrimonial contribution, to counter the allegation of financial fraud, to establish the necessity of sole custody. I locked myself in the flat and excavated the electronic traces of the past 5 years like an archaeologist. The first major find came from Ethan's Gmail. After we married, he had given me his password for household management, and though he changed it the day I filed for divorce, I had already backed up nearly 400 emails. Among them were exchanges with Martha discussing how to get her to sign a prenup, correspondence with his solicitor about running down the marital assets, and a transaction confirmation for nearly £200,000 he had secretly transferred to a Jersey account 3 years ago. The second find came from my photo gallery. I found a Christmas photo from 2 years ago at Martha's house, Ethan handing me a glass of champagne laced with whiskey while I was 3 months pregnant, Martha smiling beside us, the caption reading here, "Have a drink to warm up." I had thought nothing of it at the time. Now I looked at it and felt a chill run through me. I packaged everything and sent it to Catherine. Her reply was brief: "Good. Keep digging." The third lead came from Sarah. Using my domestic ID, she checked the marriage registry and discovered that before Ethan and I registered our marriage in Britain, he had registered a civil partnership with an Australian Chinese woman in London in 2016, which was dissolved in 2018. I had met Ethan in 2019. He had never mentioned this relationship. Civil partnerships are legally almost identical to marriage, Catherine told me on the phone. That means when you married him, he concealed a significant prior intimate relationship. Under the material non-disclosure provision in British matrimonial law, this can be used to undermine his credibility. I sat on the toilet lid in the bathroom, the only place in the flat where I wouldn't wake Thomas, and laughed out loud. The laughter bounced off the tiles, sounding a little strange. "One more thing," Catherine said. "On Thomas's birth certificate, you left the father's name blank, right?" "Yes," I said. "The hospital asked me to register the father's details, and I put unknown." "Wise choice." Catherine's tone finally warmed slightly. In the UK, if a father isn't registered on the birth certificate, he must apply to the court and prove paternity before he can seek custody or visitation. That process takes at least 6 to 8 weeks. In other words, you've bought yourself preparation time. I hung up and looked at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror, puffy, dark-circled, and unfamiliar, yet my eyes held a light I hadn't seen in years. Thomas made a couple of sounds in the bedroom and settled again. I leaned against the doorframe to watch him. The nightlight cast a warm yellow glow around his crib. He had kicked off half his blanket, and one bare foot stuck out from underneath, its 5 little toes curled. I remembered Martha's finger jabbing at my belly in court, her bright red nails almost digging into my skin, as she shrieked that I was faking pregnancy. If she could see Thomas now, this breathing, living little person, would her righteous mask still hold? I filed that image away for future use. On the 21st day, Catherine formally filed new applications with the Central Family Court. They included 3 demands. First, based on the on-court birth and the malicious defamation, that the court make a negative assessment of Ethan and Martha's conduct. Second, an emergency interim custody order placing Thomas solely in my care pending the final divorce decree. And third, a full disclosure order of all Ethan's assets. The afternoon the application was filed, Ethan finally called. I watched his name flash on the screen for a long time, until Thomas began to squirm in my arms, then I answered. Allison. His voice still carried that smooth, condescending tone, as if the 3 weeks of silence had simply been him waiting for me to cave. I hear you've hired a lawyer. Yes, I said, walking to the window with Thomas in my arms, phone in one hand, patting the baby's back with the other. Where did you get the money? He asked, a note of wariness creeping in. Did you sell my things? Ethan, I said his name, my voice calmer than I expected. Have you been to the hospital to see your child? A pause. I've been very busy, he said. And that day in court was so chaotic. Martha was shaken. I had to look after her. You haven't even asked if he's okay. My nails pressed into the silicone phone case, but my voice stayed steady. Don't change the subject, Ethan's tone hardened. Let me tell you, if you try any tricks, play any games in court, think carefully about the consequences. My legal team can drag you to bankruptcy. You can't even keep your immigration status without me. What exactly do I rely on you for? I finally cut him off. Thomas started in my arms, and I immediately softened my patting. Ethan, I've lived in Britain for 5 years. For the first 2 I worked full-time as a translator, and I paid more tax than you donate to charity. You know very well whether I was using your money or earning my own. Your paltry salary is enough to support me. I said that, and a long blocked vent in my chest suddenly opened. If you have nothing more to say, I'm hanging up. Thomas needs feeding. Allison. His voice shot up, the mask of composure cracking. That lawyer of yours, Catherine, right? I've looked her up. She's tough, but she's expensive too. How are you going to pay her? Don't come crying when you lose the case and owe a fortune. I ended the call. Thomas squirmed in protest at being held too tightly. I loosened my grip, looked at his scrunched-up face, and couldn't resist kissing his forehead. His protests faded to vague murmurs and settled. Outside, London's sky was still grey, the clouds low and heavy, pressing down on the city like an unshaken duvet. But standing at that small window, holding my 21-day-old son, I felt grounded for the first time. The next day, Sarah sent me a voice message from Edinburgh, and after listening to it, I sat stunned for several minutes. She said that someone in her Scottish University alumni group had forwarded a screenshot of an anonymous email, a private compensation agreement signed by Ethan in 2018, with another woman, a certain Anna Morris, an Englishwoman. The agreement stipulated that the female party agrees not to disclose certain private details of the relationship, in exchange for a one-time payment of £50,000. This Anna Morris is the same woman I found, who had a civil partnership with Ethan, Sarah whispered in the message. The date is 6 months before you met him. So he ended things with his ex, and within half a year he was chasing you, and never once mentioned any of this. I played the voice message 5 times, sitting on the sofa, while Thomas lay in his bassinet kicking his legs and babbling nonsense. £50,000. A keep quiet agreement. An Englishwoman erased from Ethan's resume. I forwarded the information to Catherine with a note. Is this enough to peel another layer off his credibility? Catherine's reply, beautiful. Keep going. But I knew that digging this far was already pushing the limit. I had searched all social platforms for Anna Morris. Only a deactivated Instagram account remained, with a white rose avatar and blank bio, 0 followers. Who had sent that anonymous email? How it had leaked? Why it came to me at this precise time? I would probably never know. But it didn't matter. Its existence mattered. In British law, a privately signed compensation agreement between both parties was virtually half a confession. How do you plan to use it? Sarah asked on a video call. Leaning against the headboard, Thomas asleep on my chest, his warm weight pressing my breathing shallower, I said softly, Catherine says the best use isn't to submit it as evidence immediately, but to let Ethan know I have it, put psychological pressure on him. The moment he panics, his legal team will falter. Sarah whistled. That's ruthless. Who taught you that? Catherine, I said, smiling. Or maybe it's a survival instinct you grow when you're backed into a corner. The next few days were calm on the surface, but I knew the undercurrents were strong. Catherine told me Ethan's team had filed a jurisdictional challenge, trying to move the case from family court to commercial arbitration, arguing that most of the assets, held in premarital trusts, were a business structure, rather than marital property. They want a different battlefield, Catherine explained in our weekly call. Family court judges see this all the time, emotions matter. Commercial arbitration only looks at numbers and clauses, you'd be buried under cold trust documents, needing experts for every page. So, I said, one-handedly mixing formula with the phone wedged against my shoulder, while Thomas gummed a cloth ball on the playmat. So I've applied for an independent investigation order into the on-court birth, Catherine said methodically. I need an official court report confirming your physical state, Martha and Ethan's statements, and the adjournment process. Once that report is in the file, the judge will have a hard reference. The arbitration panel can't ignore a formal investigation from the family court. I capped the bottle, shook it, and tested the temperature. What do you need me to do? Look after yourself and Thomas, Catherine said. And if Ethan or Martha tries to contact you, by phone, text, or in person, record everything, sign nothing, agree to nothing. They may try to use out-of-court settlement to buy your silence. I looked down at Thomas. He had dropped the ball and was struggling to roll over, his face red with effort. I helped him, and he flipped onto his stomach, lifted his head, and grinned at me with his toothless mouth, drool dripping onto the mat. They won't settle, I said. Martha would rather spend £500,000 on litigation than lose face in her social circle. You see clearly, Catherine said, with a rare smile. What good is seeing clearly? I said, scooping Thomas up and putting the bottle to his lips. Seeing doesn't stop them from slandering me. But at least I can remember where every drop landed. After hanging up, I paced the flat with Thomas, bottle slowly emptying, his eyelids growing heavy. Passing the window, I noticed a dark grey Jaguar parked on the street below, its windows tinted, the interior invisible. I recognized it. It belonged to Davidson, Ethan's business partner. I pulled the curtains without a second glance. Thomas finished, burped on my shoulder, and fell deeply asleep. I put him in his crib and leaned against the wall, my heart beating fast and hard. What did Davidson's car mean? What was Ethan planning? Was he having me watched? Trying to reach me through a third party? I texted Sarah, "Take back the spare keys to the flat. Don't give them to anyone but you." Sarah replied with "Okay" and a thumbs up. That night I dreamed I was back in court, the same elderly, hawk-eyed judge, but the gallery was full, Martha in the front row with crossed legs and a smirk, Ethan twirling his pen at the defendant's table, and me standing at the plaintiff's bench, holding Thomas. He woke, looking around with his light brown eyes. I kissed his forehead, and then the judge banged his gavel, saying the defamation charge against the respondent is upheld, and Martha's smirk peeled off her face like a mask. I laughed myself awake. It was still dark. Thomas was sleeping soundly in his bassinet, his breathing light and even. I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, the dream's smile still lingering. On day 37, the court's investigation report was issued. Catherine emailed me the PDF at 2 in the afternoon, just as I was changing Thomas's nappy, one hand holding his kicking legs, the other opening my phone. The report ran to 27 pages, recreating everything that happened in court, from Martha's shrill first accusation to the bailiff's dial 999, to the judge's final heavy gaze on mother and son. One paragraph I read several times. When the petitioner, Alison Gray, displayed signs of labor in court, the respondent, Martha White, publicly stated, "There she goes again, playing the victim." This statement is confirmed by medical evidence to be a baseless malicious presumption. The court finds that the petitioner's birth was a genuine clinical emergency. The respondent's remarks constitute factual mental harm to the petitioner, and this is hereby recorded. I pressed the phone to my chest, my eyes suddenly burning. Thomas kicked me with his bare bottom, protesting his bare state. I flipped him over, wiped him, and put on a fresh nappy, my hands shaking the whole time, not from fear, but from a delayed release of vindication. 27 pages. Black and white. Each page saying, "Every word you said that day has been recorded. When you pointed at my belly and called it fake, the amniotic fluid was pooling on the courtroom floor. When you laughed at my acting, my child was fighting to enter this world." "Mummy's happy," I said, lifting the newly napped Thomas and pressing my forehead to his. "Mummy's so happy she could cry." Thomas didn't understand, but he grinned, showing his bare pink gums, and gave me a big, unreserved smile. Catherine submitted the report to the presiding judge. 3 days later, Ethan withdrew the jurisdictional challenge, and the transfer to commercial arbitration was halted. The case would remain in the Central Family Court, before the same white-haired judge who had witnessed my labor. "That's a major concession," Catherine said on the phone. "They know they can't win in family court. Now they'll shift tactics, most likely attacking your parenting capacity, using your immigration status, financial instability, and mental health against you. Prepare yourself." "For what?" "Emotionally," Catherine said steadily. "They'll paint you as an unstable, incapable single mother. It's standard in custody battles, but because you're foreign, without stable income or local family support, it will hit harder." I looked down at Thomas, who was playing with a rattle on my lap. His grip was still weak, the rattle fell, and he whined. I picked it up and gave it back to him. "Let them come," I said. Since day 22, I've kept a daily parenting log, feeding times, sleep durations, weight, vaccinations, milestones. Every page dated and signed. If they want to call me unstable, I can pile those notebooks in front of them, 37 days, every single day recorded. Would an unstable mother do that? There was a pause on the line. Then Catherine's voice came through, with something almost like gentle admiration. "Alison, you're clearer-headed than most of my clients." "Clarity is forced on you," I said, rubbing Thomas's head. "Those first few weeks, I was up 4 times a night, feeding, then pumping to avoid mastitis, then passing out on the sofa, waking up drenched in sweat. I thought I was breaking. But looking back, every sleepless night, every moment, is now ammunition. After the call, I opened my notebook and added a line under today's date, day 37. Thomas grabbed his rattle intentionally for the first time, dropped 3 times, I picked it up. Investigation report passed, Ethan withdrew jurisdictional challenge. I closed the notebook and placed it with the others on the 3rd shelf of the bookcase, neatly stacked. Thomas babbled on the playmat behind me. Outside, Greenwich sky had cleared a little, and a thin ray of sunlight slanted through the window, making a bright stripe on the floor. I stared at that light for a moment. 5 years ago, when I first came to London, I had stood at a window watching similar sunshine, full of expectation, believing marriage was a harbour, a safe place to anchor. Now I knew that harbours can storm, and the only hand you can trust is your own at the tiller. Thomas yelled from the mat. I turned to find him on his side, his arm trapped underneath, giving me a rescue me look. I laughed and righted him. He immediately grabbed my finger and stuffed it into his mouth, chewing gently with his gums. "You're right," I said, looking down at him. "Mountains crumble, people run. But Mummy is here." On day 52, Ethan formally filed his first application for visitation rights. Catherine forwarded the documents, a thick stack of PDFs, their lawyerly language wrapped in a veneer of reasonableness. The applicant wishes to establish a relationship with his newborn child. Paternal involvement is crucial for the child's development. The applicant does not seek unsupervised visitation, only twice-weekly supervised meetings at a third-party facility. Every phrase was textbook British law, the perfect, good father narrative, but I knew what lay beneath. "He's playing chess," Catherine explained. "First, he enters your life with a gentle visitation approach. Once the relationship is established, he'll apply for shared custody, then gradually increase time until he becomes an integral part of Thomas's life. At that point, if you try to cut off visitation, the court will cite maintaining a stable parent-child relationship against you." I left the documents on the dining table, while Thomas gummed a teething ring in his bouncy chair, drew all over his face. Outside, London's rain had started again, pattering steadily against the north-facing window. "So what's my strategy?" I asked. 2 layers, Catherine said evenly. "First, outside court, that compensation agreement with Anna Morris. I'm considering leaking it anonymously to the social editor of the Times. Not loudly, just letting it accidentally appear in Ethan's circle. A city elite who once paid to silence an ex, when he's fighting for visitation, how much credibility does he have left? He knows the maths." Second layer. Inside court, Catherine continued. "Have you heard of a parental recognition order?" I frowned. "Doesn't applying for visitation imply he already recognizes paternity?" "He recognizes it, but legally he must formally request a DNA test through the court and have an accredited lab confirm paternity before visitation can proceed. That process takes at least 3 months. And he can't wait. Martha has apparently been telling her friends that Alison's child has no proven father. She's under more social pressure than he is." I looked at Thomas. He had dropped the teether and was waving his wet little hands at the ceiling, babbling, his light brown eyes bright in the dim rainy light. "I'm not afraid of the DNA test," I said. "Thomas is his child, that's a medical fact. I'm afraid of him using the result as a ticket. Once he's a legal father, he'll have a clear path to visitation." "So we slow down his entry," Catherine said. "I'll request a substantive review of the visitation application, on grounds of material non-disclosure of a significant prior relationship." A substantive review means the judge will require full disclosure of Ethan's past relationships, medical records, and financial dealings over the last 5 years, that alone can drag out another 2 to 3 months. Delay, I repeated, feeling the weight of the word on my tongue. Yes, delay, Catherine said. Delay until Thomas is 6 months old, until his routine, feeding, and attachment are firmly centered on you. In British courts, for babies under 10 months, there's an unwritten principle, continuity. Whoever provided stable, continuous care in the first few months has an overwhelming advantage. You've been Thomas's sole caregiver from day one, without interruption. That's your strongest card. After the call, I sat on the sofa for a long time. Thomas settled in his chair, the teether forgotten, his mouth half open, drool glistening. I wiped it with my hand, and when my finger touched his soft cheek, he instinctively turned his head toward my palm. In that movement, I understood something. Catherine's continuity and stability were just the daily, trivial moments. The 3 a.m. feeds, my eyes burning, yet always waking before his cry, the eczema nights, pacing the living room with him in my arms until dawn, his first lift of his head, his first grasp, his first roll, every milestone discovered by me. In court documents, these were just care records. In real life, they were the feel of skin, the breath of midnight wakings, the different needs I could read in every cry. Ethan had none of that. On day 55, Sarah flew from Edinburgh to see me, bringing a box of Scottish baby food and 2 tins of formula. She made a steaming bowl of tomato egg noodles in the kitchen and watched me slurp it all down, her expression complex. Thinner, she said, but your eyes are brighter. I used to be blindfolded, I said, showing her the empty bowl. Now I'm staring wide-eyed. Sarah laughed, then sobered. Seriously, I talked to Catherine. She let slip that Ethan has hired a private investigation firm to dig into you. Dig into what? Your background back home, your social circle in Britain, whether you have any lifestyle issues. Sarah lowered her voice. They want dirt, anything that can be spun as unfit mother material. I put down my chopsticks and leaned back. Outside, the rain had stopped. A patch of orange dusk light cut across the kitchen sink. Let them dig, I said. I had a 3.5-year gap between relationships in uni. After graduation, I worked translation overtime till dawn. Weekends were either library or swimming. Since coming to Britain, my social circle is so small I can scroll through my entire contacts on one screen. What could they possibly find? They can fabricate, Sarah said seriously. Ethan's got enough money to buy a few media outlets to run stories, or post anonymous threads on accounts you've never used. They don't need real dirt, just a controversial cloud. A mother with a dubious reputation. Even if you win the case, your name is ruined. I was quiet for a moment. Thomas fussed from his bouncy chair. Sarah brought him to me. I took his warm, soft weight, and he immediately grabbed my collar and stuffed it in his mouth. Then I'll create 2, I said, gently extracting my collar and giving him a pacifier instead. They have investigators, I have you. Help me find Anna Morris. Sarah blinked. The English woman. Yes, I said, patting Thomas's back to burp him. The one who took his 50,000. Where did she go after 2018? What's she doing now? What really happened between her and Ethan? I don't have the time or reach, but you do. You're in Scotland. It's easier for you to search within the UK. Sarah looked at me for a couple of seconds, then smiled wryly. You're going to expose his whole past. He opened the lid himself, I said. I'm just airing out the contents. After Sarah left, I paced the living room with Thomas until he fell asleep, my mind churning. The investigation report was in hand, the jurisdictional challenge withdrawn, DNA test not yet filed. On paper, the tide was turning. But Sarah's words about reputation stuck in my throat. Ethan and Martha knew exactly how to use money and connections to shape public opinion. I might win the case, but if they branded me in the public eye as a gold digger, liar, unfit mother, Thomas would grow up in that shadow. I couldn't let that happen. That night, after the 3 a.m. feed and settling Thomas, I made a decision. I opened my phone's notes and began writing a long piece. The title was 4 words, My Position. I used no emotional language, no accusations or tears, only facts, in chronological order: meeting in Manchester in 2019, marriage later that year, Ethan's growing control, financial concealment, Martha's verbal attacks at family dinners, his neglect of prenatal care, freezing my accounts after divorce filing, their statements in court, my waters breaking in front of the judge, and the fact that he had never once contacted me to ask about Thomas's well-being. Behind each fact I listed corresponding evidence, email screenshots, bank statements, medical records, investigation report. I didn't name-call anyone, just laid out events like a line of chess pieces. I saved it as a draft, unpublished. Not yet. Catherine said to play cards one at a time, the key card at the most painful moment. On day 63, Ethan formally submitted the DNA application. That same day, Catherine, citing material non-disclosure, applied for a substantive review of the visitation application. Both documents entered the judge's system on the same day, like trains on parallel tracks, headlights meeting. I sat in the flat holding Thomas, watching clouds roll across the sky. London's spring came late. Late April still carried a damp chill, but the cherry blossoms along the streets had opened, their pale petals blowing off and carpeting the pavement. My phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered, a young woman's voice with a clear West Country English accent. Alison. It's Anna Morris. My fingers tightened on the phone. Thomas squirmed. I switched the phone to my other ear and lowered my voice. How did you find me? A Scottish woman named Jones contacted me on LinkedIn, Anna said, sounding tense but articulate. She said you were looking for me, wanting to know about Ethan. I didn't intend to respond, but I saw that draft you wrote. My back stiffened. What draft? My position, Anna said. I don't know how it got out, but someone sent it to my anonymous email. After I read it. Alison, there are things I need to tell you face to face. 1,000 thoughts flashed through my mind. That draft only existed in my phone's notes, never sent to anyone. How did it reach Anna Morris? Was it Sarah? Had someone hacked my phone? Or a simpler possibility, the draft had synced to iCloud, and my iCloud had once been linked to Ethan's family account. However it leaked, it had leaked. But at this moment, that didn't matter. Are you in London? I asked. Yes, Anna said. I flew in yesterday. Can we meet? Just once. I looked down at Thomas. He was awake, staring at the ceiling, blowing spit bubbles. Tomorrow at 2, the cafe at Greenwich Park entrance, I said. I'll bring the baby. After hanging up, my heart pounded. Thomas seemed to sense my agitation, reaching up to pat my face with his chubby hand. I kissed his little palm and texted Catherine, Anna Morris is in London. Meeting tomorrow. Catherine replied instantly, good. Then another, record everything. The next day I arrived early at the cafe with the pram. It was a small red-fronted shop, standing out against the grey street. I took a window seat. Thomas played with a cloth ball, occasionally letting out excited squeaks. I ordered a tea and waited, running my finger along the cup's rim, watching the red wooden door. Anna Morris was slighter and smaller than I'd pictured, with short dark hair, wearing an olive-green trench coat. She glanced at Thomas in the pram as she entered, her expression flickering with complexity. She sat down, ordered a black coffee, and looked at me for a long time. "You look more worn than in your photos," she said, not unkindly, more like observation. "But your eyes are very bright." Ethan used to describe you as quiet and compliant, he never mentioned your eyes. "He never really looked at me," I said. "Anna, why did you come?" She stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking against the cup. The cafe played low jazz. Outside, cherry petals stuck to the window. "That £50,000, she began, her voice low. "It wasn't a break-up settlement. It was hush money." I waited. "We met in 2016, he was my boss," Anna said, her fingers tightening on the cup, knuckles white. "We registered a civil partnership, and lived together for 8 months. During those months, he did things. He kept my passport in a safe to stop me leaving the UK. He went through my phone and called every contact to verify whether I was cheating, and one night, when I tried to run out to call the police, he grabbed me back in the stairwell and dislocated my wrist." She didn't cry as she said this. Her voice was calm, as if telling someone else's story. But her fingertips trembled against the cup handle, like leaves in the wind. "I had no police record," she said. "I was too scared. He was British, had lawyer friends, connections. I was just a foreign girl on a work visa. In the end, he dumped me, said he was tired of my neurotic behavior. Afterwards, he gave me the 50,000 and had me sign a confidentiality agreement, ensuring I wouldn't reveal his unstable moments to anyone." I held my now cold tea, my stomach clenching. Thomas babbled in the pram. I put my hand in and held his tiny finger. He immediately calmed and squeezed my index finger. "Why didn't you speak out earlier?" My voice was hoarse. "I was afraid," Anna said, lifting her eyes. The warm cafe light reflected in her dark brown pupils. "I was afraid no one would believe me. He's so careful, never loses control in public, always the picture of civility. Only behind closed doors does the other man appear." I had no proof back then, no recordings, nothing. The 50,000 was the only thing I could take, and he gave it so casually, saying just tie up loose ends. She set the cup down with a dull clink. "Then I read what you wrote," she said. "You, 8 months pregnant, standing in court, while he and his mother pointed at your belly and called you a liar, and when your waters broke, they still said you were acting." I sat in my flat in Bristol reading those words and felt like I'd been electrocuted. "Alison, I know what you're going through. What he did to me, he found a different way to do to you." I took a deep breath, my jaw tight. Thomas kicked his legs, dropped his ball. I didn't pick it up immediately. I just looked at Anna, watching her trembling fingers gradually steady. "Would you testify?" I asked. "In court." Anna was silent for a long time. Outside, a child on a bicycle passed, its bell ringing twice. She looked down at the coffee residue in her cup, then lifted her head, her eyes glistening. "I used part of that 50,000 to open a flower shop. The rest is still in savings," she said. "All these years I've felt like I lost to him. It's hard to describe. He bought my silence, but I would rather be poor forever than be known as the woman who took hush money. You're fighting him now, Alison, not for money, but for something else. The same thing I've swallowed for years. So I'll do it." She wiped the corner of her eye, quickly, as if afraid to be seen. "Whenever you need me, I'll be there." Thomas grew restless, kicking his feet hard. I retrieved his ball and gave it back to him, then kissed his chubby foot. His fussing stopped, replaced by contented babbling. I sat up straight and faced Anna, and felt the tight string inside me loosen by half. "Thank you," I said. The 3 words were soft, but I felt them rising from a place deep in my chest, not just habitual politeness. Anna nodded, took a sip of coffee, and then suddenly smiled. a teary smile, a little messy, but with a hint of release. "You were right," she said, looking out at the scattered cherry blossoms. "I thought I had shattered. But seeing you, holding your baby and still fighting, maybe broken things can be put back together." We parted, and I pushed Thomas through Greenwich Park. It was unseasonably fine for late April, a pale blue sky, sunshine making the grass gleam. Families picnicked, children chased footballs, the observatory dome curved softly in the light. I sat on a bench, lifted Thomas onto my lap. He looked up at the branches overhead. A shaft of sunlight fell on his face, he sneezed and reached for the light. "Thomas," I said quietly, "if ever anyone tries to put me down in front of you, remember, Mummy never gave up. Not one single day." He didn't understand, but he patted my cheek with his free hand, a light, wet pressure. That night, I reopened my position and added a final paragraph. "I have a witness. She's willing to speak her truth." Together, our stories form a complete picture. Two masks worn by the same man. What he did to her behind closed doors, he did to me in broad daylight, with the same hands. Saved. Still unpublished. I called Catherine and told her everything. She listened in silence, then let out an unusual sigh. "What you have now," she said, "is the thing Ethan's legal team fears most. A sealed agreement only proves he didn't want his ex to speak, that's just unseemly. But a former partner willing to testify about physical coercive control, that pushes the case from civil dispute to pattern of behavior. The court is no longer looking at the breakdown of a marriage, but at a man's systematic use of power and resources to control the women in his life." "Does that affect visitation?" I asked. "Significantly," Catherine said. "In visitation cases, the primary measure is whether the father poses a risk to the child. Prior physical coercion, habitual deception and concealment, economic suppression, these all constitute risk. If Anna Morris's testimony is admitted, Ethan's chances of winning visitation fall below 30%. I hung up and leaned back on the sofa, closing my eyes. Thomas slept in the bedroom. His breathing came through the baby monitor, steady and even. I listened to it like the world's safest white noise. But nothing was ever straightforward. On day 72, I found a letter in the communal mailbox, no return address, London postmark, only Alison, in ballpoint pen. Inside was a single A4 sheet, printed. "The cafe where you met the Englishwoman has CCTV. Guess if Ethan has a copy." No signature. But a faint fingerprint-shaped watermark at the bottom, as if sweat from someone's hand had transferred during printing. I read it 3 times, then felt a chill followed by sharp calm. They had tracked Anna's visit. They might be following me, or at least watching key locations. The note was a warning, or intimidation. I photographed it and sent it to Catherine, then placed the page in a sealed evidence bag. That afternoon, I took an extra detour with Thomas, checking for tails. Nothing. I checked the door frame, no signs of tampering. But that watched feeling lingered like a thin layer of ice on my back. Sarah called that evening. After I told her, she was silent for a long time. "I'll fly down again tomorrow," she finally said. "Don't face this alone." "Sarah," I said, "you're not my bodyguard. You shouldn't give up your life in Edinburgh for me." "Alison, shut up," she suddenly snapped, so fiercely I froze. "When you pulled me back from the brink of depression in university, did you say don't give up your time for me? Now you're telling me to stay away. Dream on." I stood in the bathroom, phone in hand, and laughed, and then something hot welled up. I wiped it hard, sniffed. "Okay," I said. "Come. I need you to do something." "What?" "If Anna's testimony is our ace, she needs protection. She's alone in a London hotel. I'm worried." Catherine says she can arrange temporary legal protection, but someone needs to coordinate. I'll handle it. Sarah hung up. On day 74, Sarah appeared at my door again, this time with a huge suitcase and a portable camera. She set up the camera in the corner of the living room and unpacked power banks, audio recorders, spare phones, several prepaid SIM cards. Starting a detective agency? I asked, holding Thomas in the kitchen doorway. Survival supplies, Sarah said, not looking up. Catherine handles the legal evidence. I'm making sure you don't get blocked in the real world. Ethan, when cornered, will do anything. I didn't argue. I remembered Anna's words, the passport locked away, the phone rifled, the dislocated wrist. Ethan wasn't a gentleman banker. When he lost control, he was a domestic animal shedding its skin. And I held all the cards to strip him of visitation. He would realize that soon enough. Cornered. Sarah was right. On day 81, the first preliminary hearing for the substantive review of visitation took place. I didn't attend. Catherine represented me. But she called immediately after. Ethan appeared in person, Catherine said, with barely suppressed excitement. He could have sent his lawyer, but he showed up. And during the hearing, when the judge asked why his previous civil partnership ended, his lawyer tried to interrupt and redirect, but Ethan himself said, that was a long time ago, irrelevant to this case. And then the judge said, I'll quote, applicant, this case involves an assessment of your personal stability. Any past relationship you choose to avoid may be considered a matter requiring further inquiry. Catherine's pace quickened. Allison, the judge was pointed. That's rare in a preliminary hearing, usually they stay neutral. But today, he clearly remembers your on-court labor. I leaned back. Thomas was asleep on my chest, his small mouth slightly open, warm breath on my skin. I felt my heart beat against his forehead, like a silent conversation. What's next? I asked. Next is the evidence exchange period, Catherine said. From now until the formal trial, about 8 to 10 weeks, both sides submit full evidence lists. We'll submit the investigation report, Anna Morris's testimony, your parenting logs, the financial evidence from the marriage. They'll probably attack your mental health and might bring in expert witnesses to assess your parenting capacity. Let them, I said, patting Thomas's back. My entire NHS medical record for 5 years, no mental health clinic visits, ever. Only 2 GP visits, both for routine prenatal checkups. They can't invent an unstable diagnosis. Catherine paused. You already checked your records. I requested my full medical file through the NHS app the first time you mentioned a mental health attack, I said. It took 3 weeks to arrive. I mean, isn't that what a smart client should do? Catherine let out a quiet laugh. Allison, sometimes you make me feel I could retire early. Don't, I said, smiling. You still need to finish this fight. After hanging up, I looked at Thomas. He smacked his lips in his sleep, his hand curled on my collarbone. I breathed in the scent of his hair, milk and baby shampoo, the most soothing thing I knew. On day 90, Ethan's side submitted a mental health evaluation request, asking for an independent psychologist to assess my parenting capacity. The language was polished, in the best interest of the child, the mental health of the primary caregiver should be assessed. Translation: they wanted a shrink to say I was crazy. Catherine replied, our client agrees to the evaluation, provided that the assessing psychologist is jointly agreed upon and has expertise in infant attachment. The assessment must be video recorded, with both counsel allowed to observe. Ethan's team agreed. 10 days later, the assessment took place at a private psychology clinic in central London. I fed Thomas early, left him with Sarah, wore a clean white shirt and dark trousers, tied my hair neatly, and arrived on time. The psychologist was a Welshwoman in her 50s, Dr. Jones, who spoke slowly and had a calming accent. The assessment lasted 3 hours. She asked about my adjustment to Britain, daily life during marriage, emotional state during pregnancy and postpartum, my experience caring for Thomas, and my social support network. I answered every question honestly, not glossing over pain or vulnerability. Have you ever felt despair? Dr. Jones asked near the end. Yes, I said. In court, when my waters broke, I leaned against the cold bench watching my husband and his mother call me an actress. I felt profound despair, not because of the pain, but because the people, who should have believed me most publicly, defamed me in front of everyone. How did you cope? I gave birth to him, I said. Thomas. When I saw him for the first time in the delivery room, that despair condensed into something small and specific. I wanted my child to grow up knowing his mother never broke down in front of him. Dr. Jones made notes, then looked up at me, her professional detachment softening into something I couldn't quite name. Mrs. Gray, your self-awareness and emotional regulation are above average for your age group, she said, closing her notepad and shaking my hand. I'll submit my report to the court in 2 weeks. Personally, however, I want to say, you are a remarkably resilient mother. I thanked her and walked out. On the pavement, I looked up at the grey London sky. A breeze rustled the leaves. A red double-decker passed, its window reflecting my figure, less gaunt, shoulders straighter than months ago. On day 105, the report came. The conclusion read, no clinically significant mental health disorder found. The client demonstrates robust emotional recovery after stress, normal daily functioning, and high-quality attachment interaction with her infant. Her mental health does not constitute a detriment to parenting capacity. Catherine sent the scanned page with a short note, they lost this round.